In late 1995, Vince McMahon shocked a lot of people around him in the company behind the scenes when he brought Cowboy Bill Watts into the company. He brought him in at the recommendation of Jim Ross. Jim Ross is the biggest cowboy fan of the world. He worked for Bill Watts. He kind of was under the learning tree with Bill Watts. And he recommended that Vince bring him in because I guess Vince McMahon was looking to step back a little bit and focus more on the behind-the-scenes business end of the company and less so on the creative end. And he gave Watts what he told Watts at the time would be full autonomy over the creative direction of the product. And I guess that, what Watts thought would also be the authority to make certain other decisions behind the scenes without having to worry about being overruled. He wasn't interested in coming in and being, working for someone else and being told what to do, yes and no. He was told that we're going to bring you in and I'm going to take a step back and you're going to have the freedom to kind of, put a system in place that you think works and creatively go in the direction that you feel you want to go in. It took less than 3 weeks before he was overruled on something and he quit the company. And many years later in a shoot interview, Watts said that Vince McMahon has a serious problem with delegating authority. And so it should come as no surprise that 1 year later, 1 year after WWE made a huge splash by announcing the appointment of Paul Heyman as the new executive director of Monday Night Raw and Eric Bischoff as the new executive director for SmackDown, 12 months later, and neither man occupies the position for which they were hired. This is a segment of the Sound Off here that you could have predicted the minute those hires were announced. If I were to say to you, a year from now, I'm going to be doing a whole segment on the show talking about the firing of Eric Bischoff and Paul Heyman, I don't think a single one of you would have been shocked. It was only a matter of when. It was not a matter of if. Although I had hopes at the time that it would turn out differently. I tried to be optimistic. Foolishly, naively maybe, but I tried to be optimistic that maybe, just maybe, Vince McMahon was trying to shake things up for real and create real change on his television shows. And that he would have the patience to stick with it, and hopefully both shows over time would improve. After all, he was restarting the XFL, and maybe his football fetish would take his attention away from the creative end of things and allow other people to have more of a say and have more of a hand in the day-to-day, week-to-week creative decisions. But then COVID killed the XFL, and the Football League went away, and so it was all wrestling again. And it's still amazing. It's 74 years old. I think he'll be 75 in August. As involved as he is and as hands-on as Vince McMahon still is, right on down to, the urine segment on SmackDown, or just these dumb television segments, in a way, it's kind of admirable that he still has the stamina and the energy to be this involved and this hands-on and work as many hours as he works. I admire the man's work ethic, don't get me wrong. He's got a work ethic that would put a lot of people to shame. But when you're 75 years old, you really need to be involved in the day-to-day creative decisions. This is such a big business now. I just think back to the Watts story from 1995 when the company was not doing well financially. And the company was a hell of a lot smaller and less profitable than it is today. And even then, he wanted to take a step back, apparently. He wanted to take a step back and focus on the core business and not so much all the creative stuff and dealing with all the egos and all the bullshit that goes into it. And here we are now, 25 years later, and he is as involved in the most minute of creative decisions as he has ever been. In the ears of the announcers, everything that we hear about Vince McMahon. Does he really need to still be that involved at his age? As big as this business has grown? Apparently the answer is yes. On Thursday, WWE issued a statement that read as follows. A brief statement. It says, in an effort to streamline our creative writing process for television, we have consolidated both teams from Raw and SmackDown into one group led by Bruce Prichard. Paul Heyman will concentrate on his role as an in-ring performer. 1 year ago, where were we? Where were we in June of 2019? The shows were abysmal. The television shows were abysmal. Some people would say they still are. But a year ago, they were horrendous. And the week that they announced the new positions for Bischoff and for Heyman, Monday Night Raw had 3,500 people in the audience that week, or the week before. SmackDown had dwindled to 2,500. This is the kind of live business they were doing and these are not just house shows. These were television tapings. Monday Night Raw, 3 hours of Monday Night Raw, or actually 4 hours, I guess, if they tape matches for main event or whatever before Raw. 2,500 people in the building for SmackDown. This is back during that period where they had to tarp off more than half the building and film it a certain way to make it look more full than it really was. This was the state of WWE at that time. Television ratings were at record lows. This is the part where 2020 would tell 2019, hold my beer. But the shows were as bad as they had ever been. And I was encouraged when I heard about the changes because it meant that they at least recognized that there was a problem and hopefully they were going to start making some moves to address those problems. But remember the skepticism that I had. Because both men were still reporting directly to Vince McMahon, and it was said at the time that Vince McMahon would still have final say over what we saw on these shows. These were not positions of full autonomy at all. It was all reporting to Vince. Vince was going to make the final decision and put his stamp of approval on it. That was not going to change. And that was reason enough to be skeptical about all of this. Eric Bischoff, he was the first one to fall. 4 months. I mean, I'm talking about a year later. This was 4 months. 4 months after he was hired for the job. He even moved his family from Wyoming all the way to Connecticut. He's since claimed, well, the job wasn't really a good fit because Vince McMahon had certain expectations that I couldn't meet. It just didn't work out. And so the axe fell, and in stepped Bruce Prichard to take his place as the new executive director of SmackDown. This was only a matter of months after he was rehired by the company to join the creative team. He had been out. He had been gone from WWE for, I think, about a decade. Actually, it might have been more. So I think it was 2008 when he got fired the second time. And early 2019, he was officially back in the fold. He was back in the family. I mean, Bruce Prichard has engineered quite the comeback story. He has been with WWE off and on, mostly on, but he's been with WWE off and on since 1987. He's been fired twice, the first time in 1991, the second time in 2008. He has been one of Vince McMahon's closest confidants. A few years ago, he started a podcast with Conrad Thompson that even got picked up by WWE. It got picked up by the WWE Network, briefly. Or at least another version of it was. You can trace Prichard's comeback right back to the success of that podcast. Without that podcast, I don't believe that he is in the position that he's in right now. I hope Conrad got himself a finder's fee. But he gets rehired by WWE. Lands himself an executive director position when one guy gets fired. And when the other guy gets fired, he takes over the whole damn thing. At least in title. Because we all know nobody ever really takes anything over in this company. Not when Vince McMahon is still involved. And we all know that the same thing that happened to Bischoff and the same thing that happened to Paul Heyman is going to eventually happen to Bruce Prichard. Again, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. He's smart enough where I think it's going to be a while. I think he's safe. He's been around this place. He's danced this dance for a lot of years. I think he's savvy enough and smart enough where he'll stick it out longer than the other two did. He'll certainly last longer than Bischoff did. I think it's safe to say he'll last longer than 4 months. He is smart to the way that Vince McMahon does things. He has worked for Vince McMahon a lot longer than either Eric Bischoff or Paul Heyman, even the two of them combined. You know, people have called him a yes man. I'm sure he would dispute that, because of course he would. But he knows what Vince McMahon likes, and he knows what Vince McMahon does not like. And he writes for an audience of one. Or he oversees the writing for an audience of one. But I love, by the way, that statement that WWE put out. I love how that statement said that Paul Heyman will concentrate on his role as an in-ring performer. like he's training at the Performance Center, trying to drop weight for his in-ring debut. I can picture him now, you know, coming out for his entrance, bouncing up and down the way that Brock Lesnar bounces up and down, wearing the Jimmy John shorts. What will he be? What will Paul Heyman be? Will he be a high flyer? Will he dive? Since everybody in the company is mandated to do at least one dive per match, I don't think he's going to be able to get out of it. What an odd thing to say. He is an on-screen performer. He is not an in-ring performer. Those are two very different things. That'd be like saying Michael Cole is, you know, he took a vacation and Michael Cole is back as an in-ring performer. We've seen Michael Cole as an in-ring performer. I don't need to see Michael Cole again as an in-ring performer. One of the worst WrestleMania matches of all time. The Observer said that Heyman was working with two contracts, one as a performer, the other being an employee management deal. That has since been terminated. Mike Johnson of PW Insider said it was purely a Vince McMahon call. A source noted to him that Vince McMahon has been very upset and openly frustrated of late with Monday Night Raw. Fancy that, I just learned that Vince McMahon and I actually have something in common. We've both been very upset and openly frustrated with Monday Night Raw. Now, if I find out that he likes Hall & Oates, it'll blow my mind. One of the positive things about what Paul Heyman had done with Monday Night Raw is focus on new faces. He focused on new faces and new talents. Drew McIntyre is in a prime position right now as the champion. We saw renewed focus on certain people like Angel Garza, who I think the sky's the limit for him. I know he's not physically a very big guy, but Angel Garza should go far in this company. He's got a ton of charisma. He's a very good wrestler. Angel Garza, he should be one of the premier stars on that brand in the next few years. So I hope we continue to see an Angel Garza push. But Angel Garza and Andrade and the Street Profits and Apollo Crews, right? We've seen this renewed focus and push for some of these guys. And the fact that Heyman was taking the time to try to build them up as stars. Now, I understand that. I understand what he was trying to do, and I understand that they do need to make new stars because the old stars are aging out. They're not going to be able to rely on them forever. This is what happens, by the way. When you rely too heavily on nostalgia and you rely too heavily on the stars of the past, as they've done over the years, eventually that's going to come back to bite you on the ass if you haven't done a good job of building up new stars to kind of slip right in and take their spot. They have not done a very good job of that in recent years. We saw the Shield guys. The Shield guys were probably the biggest new stars that the company has made or put their promotional muscle behind in the last 5 years. Daniel Bryan took off finally after he had been in the company for a few years. You can pick names here and there, but has the company really done this tremendous job of creating this wealth of new stars? No. They really haven't. When you look at all the talent they have under contract right now and the number of really, people that you can really call new stars who have gotten over on television, no, I don't think they've done a great job. So Heyman was trying with some of these people. Try to put some new faces in place. But I'm not going to sit here and sing the praises of Paul Heyman on Monday Night Raw. I'm not going to sit here and rant about, oh, what an awful thing. I can't believe they did Paul Heyman dirty. He's been removed. And what a terrible thing it is. For this reason, whoever you want to blame for this, the reality is this. Paul Heyman, yes, he's been the executive director of Monday Night Raw now for a year. And yes, he does not have autonomous power to do anything that he wants. He is still answering to the old man. All that being said, the reality is this. Monday Night Raw is still an unexciting, uninteresting television show. Paul Heyman may have been taking his time and he may have been trying. Maybe he would have gotten there eventually. But Monday Night Raw is still a bad show. It was a bad show a year ago, and it is a bad show today. Maybe a little less bad, but it's still bad. There will be weeks here and there where they pop a good one out, but so long as the show remains 3 hours, which is a decision that was beyond Paul Heyman's control, it's a decision that's going to be beyond Bruce Prichard's control. So long as the show is 3 hours every single week, this will never change. 3 hours of Monday Night Raw every week is very different than a 3-hour pay-per-view once a month. I've seen some people over the years when I've criticized the 3-hour format, well, aren't pay-per-views 3 hours? Don't you ever watch a 3 or 4 hour pay-per-view show that you go, man, that was a great show? Good point. Yes, I do. I do. Two very different things. Two very different things. A Monday Night Raw, it's not just action, it's not just matches. You got commercial break. It feels like they've got more commercial breaks on the show now than they did maybe even a year ago. And you can have, look, you got to pay the bills. Got to have commercial breaks. I understand that. No problem. But I think they can sometimes do a better job of positioning them on the show. When you have a match, we had 4 commercial breaks during Daniel Bryan and AJ Styles on Friday on Fox. Now, when the match is that long, you're going to have a lot of commercial breaks. But sometimes I feel like, the match begins, the bell rings, oh, we got to go to break. Then they come back and they do 3 moves, oh, we got to go to break. That doesn't help. That doesn't help. But with the pay-per-views, with the right matches and the right mix of stars, you can have an excellent 3-hour pay-per-view. Everything that you see on the television shows is building to that one big pay-per-view every single month, and that is the key. Once a month, you have this big 3-hour show or 3.5-hour show. It's a lot easier to put on an enjoyable, 3 or 4 hour show once a month that breezes by without commercials than it is a 3-hour television show. 52 weeks a year. The erosion of Raw's television audience ever since 2012 when they went to 3 hours is proof of what I am talking about. It has been a steady decline. The pandemic just worsened a problem that already existed. I don't want to hear, it's all the pandemic's fault. No, it's not. This was a problem before anybody even knew what COVID was. You make it sound like this has been a problem since February or since March. You must be new here. They can't do it. Paul Heyman couldn't do it, and Bruce Prichard won't be able to do it either. SmackDown doesn't take it on the chin the way the Raw does, because it is an easier show to watch at 2 hours instead of 3. But there have been plenty of dreadful SmackDown shows since coming to Fox. Let's not kid ourselves into thinking that SmackDown has been, much better under the thumb of Bruce Prichard than Raw was under the thumb of Paul Heyman. But I generally find more to like on Fridays than I do on Mondays, despite Baron Corbin being on the roster. I was enjoying the Mandy and Otis storyline. It's kind of, I don't want to say it's past its expiration point, but we got the peak, right? The peak was Otis gets the girl. So now they're kind of like treading water a little bit. I still enjoy the interplay between them, but that storyline was paid off at WrestleMania, and it was a great story. It was a simple story. I enjoyed it. SmackDown now has 2 of the best, talents in the entire company in Daniel Bryan and AJ Styles. Now Matt Riddle is coming to SmackDown, so they're bringing some new talent over from NXT. I've grown to really like the job that Bayley has done as a heel champion on the SmackDown brand. I wasn't sold on her at first, but now I am. The tag team division is a mess. They got hurt by Jimmy Uso's injury. He's going to be gone for a while. And the Forgotten Sons are better left forgotten. But the point is, these shows are still the creative vision of one man. When you keep the same showrunner and refuse to change, and I've used The Walking Dead in the past as an example of this. The Walking Dead, a lot of people used to watch The Walking Dead. The Walking Dead used to get upwards of 20 million viewers every single week in the early seasons of the show. And now the show is in season 10 or 11 now. I still watch it. I feel like I'm one of the few. There's a hell of a lot less than 20 million people watching The Walking Dead now. But they've gone through a whole bunch of different showrunners. And when, like, the last one they brought in, there was a noticeable improvement in the quality and the direction of the show because it was a different vision. Somebody was brought in with a fresher, different vision than the person before them. And so far, I think it's paid off. I think it's worked. I think the show has improved. To the point where I think if people were to give it another shot, if they had previously watched, they probably would enjoy it. But that's just one example. When you have the same showrunner, year after year after year, and they refuse to change the way that they do things, and they have a very narrow-minded vision of what they think is entertaining and what the audience wants to see, there is not much that you can do. I don't care who they bring in. You can talk about how Paul Heyman is going to change Raw and push new faces, but they weren't getting over fast enough. Well, you know what? How do you even measure that? That's my other question. How do you even measure anymore who's getting over and what's working and what's not when you have no audiences? How do you know how over Drew McIntyre is, or how over Andrade is, or Angel Garza, or Apollo Crews, or Bobby Lashley, when you don't have live crowds to react to them in real time and tell you what works and what doesn't? Not that they always listen to us, but isn't that what we've always been told? It's a business based on audience reaction and crowd reaction and playing off the crowd. Well, now there are no crowds. It has fundamentally changed the way that they do business and the way that they book these shows. And I said, when this all started, I said, this is going to be the biggest problem of all. Because now Vince McMahon has no barometer for what works and what doesn't. It's just, this is what I want and this is what I think works. And there's nobody there in the building that's going to say or react in a way that tells him otherwise. They got people in the audience from the PC. They may as well put an applause sign up and go, okay, clap like seals. Clap like seals. They'll react the way that they think Vince McMahon wants them to react. There is no longer that instant feedback from the audience. And that has, I think, in a lot of ways made things worse. The only thing that you're left with as far as how do you measure what works and what doesn't is television ratings. Big, fat TV contracts. One with NBC Universal, one with Fox. I will never miss an opportunity to make fun of all the people who say that ratings don't matter anymore. Every chance I get to make fun of these people, I take full advantage of it. So I am more than happy to mention that again here. And what a fool these people are. Nobody is saying that the ratings have the same impact maybe that they had during the Monday Night War. Plus, you had a competition back then. You know, Raw doesn't have another competing wrestling show on Monday nights. And yes, technology is very different now. There are different ways to watch the show. So the world has changed in 20 years. Nobody is denying that. But this insistence by some people that ratings don't matter, you're just a fool. You're just a fool. And now it's the only way that they can measure what, I mean, outside of merch, I guess, they can measure who's selling the most merchandise. Although they're not selling any merch at live events because there are no live events. It's all online. But really, the only way right now, until crowds come back to measure things, is by looking at the television ratings and looking at the quarter hours. Every single week, and the demos and all of that stuff. Monday Night Raw has logged some of the worst ratings in the history of the show during this pandemic. SmackDown has also seen the worst ratings of the Fox era in the last few weeks. At least this week, they were back up over 2 million viewers. Overnight viewers. Raw has been languishing under 2 million viewers now for weeks. 1.7 million viewers each of the last 4 weeks. And what's funny about this idea that Paul Heyman was fired because the Raw ratings were so bad is that when you compare the Raw numbers to the SmackDown numbers during the COVID era, the Performance Center era, it's even Steven. As far as the percentage of the audience that each show has lost, yes, SmackDown numbers are a little bit higher, but you would expect them to be because it's on network television. But SmackDown, since March, is down 25%. Monday Night Raw, since March, is down 25%. So I think there's a lot more going on here than just television ratings being down. Because if it was only about TV ratings, we'd be getting the inevitable podcast with Bruce Prichard talking about why he got fired for a third time. Not only did he keep his job, he now has more responsibilities than ever before. This now puts Brother Love in charge of 5 hours of content every week on television. So something else is going on here. And we'll have to wait and see if more reports come out. Maybe there was... Look, it wouldn't be the first time that Vince McMahon and Paul Heyman had some kind of big blow-up backstage. The famous story of the big blow-up on the corporate jet when Heyman left or got fired or quit, whatever happened back in 2006 after the December to Dismember pay-per-view. What a disaster that was. And then we didn't see Heyman again for another 6 years until Brock Lesnar came back. Let's see what other stories leak out in the next few weeks. But to me, this just reeks of something more than just television ratings. Vince McMahon talked about the declining numbers on their earnings call back in April. Remember that? That was the call where he mentioned, well, we don't have Brock Lesnar anymore. as like one of the main reasons that Raw has suffered. I love that. I get a nice laugh, a nice chuckle out of that every time I think back to that. Of course, they don't have Brock Lesnar anymore. That explains it. They don't have Brock Lesnar most of the fucking year. You can't explain the numbers away by saying, oh, we don't have Brock Lesnar anymore. But he also said, we have a new champion, we have a lot of new performers. And he admitted in his own words, this was Vince McMahon in his own words, it takes a while to get these people over. This was only, what was this, 2 months ago? I don't even think this was a full 8 weeks ago. What happened in those 8 weeks that his whole perspective changed? Now look, there could have been certain talents or other people behind the scenes who also did not like the job that Paul Heyman was doing. There's a rumor that the reason AJ Styles was moved, he was traded over to SmackDown, is because he did not get along with Paul Heyman. He didn't like him. And if Heyman's idea was to push new faces and younger talent and build around newer, younger talent, then you could understand why 43-year-old AJ Styles might not be too fond of his vision. I'm just saying, I'm not saying that's the reason why, but if there was some kind of issue there, you can understand maybe that had something to do with it. FTR, the former Revival, when they were on the podcast last week with Jim Cornette, they were asked about, what was it like to deal with Paul Heyman and Bruce Prichard? Who is the better person to deal with? And I think it was Scott Dawson who said, at least Bruce Prichard, in their words, doesn't believe the bullshit that comes out of his mouth. Whereas Paul Heyman would cut it up and he would serve it to them on a platter in their dealings with him. But they also admitted, they said, look, we don't envy the positions that either guy is in. They said all they're doing, all these guys are doing, they are saying and doing whatever they have to do to survive, to keep their jobs, and to make their money. And that really is the biggest issue here. Is there anyone in a position of power or authority in this company, or in a creative capacity, is there anyone at all who has the balls to have a frank conversation with Vince McMahon about his ideas and his television product? I talked about the interview Road Dogg did with Corey Graves. He clearly doesn't. Is there anyone else? If Prichard is just going to write what he thinks Vince McMahon wants to see, and if Vince McMahon was unhappy with Paul Heyman developing new talent and new stars, then what does that mean for Drew McIntyre as WWE Champion? What does that mean for Bobby Lashley? What does that mean for all these other talents and Murphy and Austin Theory and Shayna Baszler? That's the real question here. How different is Monday Night Raw going to look coming out of Backlash? And over the next, let's say, 6 weeks. How different is it going to look than it looks right now? It's possible that Paul Heyman already had plans in place that he was building to certain SummerSlam matches, and now that could all go out the window. There could be radical change coming to Monday Night Raw. And look, I'm all for radical change if it's the right change. If it's going to make the show better, if it's going to make the show more fun, if it's going to be more, pissing in a cup and drug testing and bullshit like that, then no thank you. I'm just not convinced watching SmackDown every single week that Bruce Prichard is the answer. But If not Bruce, then who? Who? I sound like New Day now. Who? If not him, then who? That's a trick question, by the way. There is no real answer to that. Actually, there is. The answer is no one. The answer is no one. Unless Vince McMahon cedes that power to somebody else, that person does not exist. Because and if I'm Paul Levesque, I'm staying as far the fuck away from Raw and SmackDown as I possibly can. I see what's going on here. This guy gets fired. That guy gets fired. He's having a tough enough time. He can't even beat AEW on Wednesday nights. If I'm Paul Levesque, I'm more than happy to take a back seat here. I'm in no rush to come to Raw or SmackDown to take over on the creative end. As long as Vince McMahon has his hands on the creative process, anybody in that position, like Prichard, is going to be in self-preservation mode. Got to keep my job. Got to keep my position. That's all that matters. Don't piss off Vince. It's his company. It's his product. Let's not rock the boat. Because they see someone like Heyman who at least tried to do something with some new faces, and the boss just didn't have the patience to see if it would have paid off or not. So far, it has not. So far, it has not paid off. And so if you don't want to lose your job, you're going to be a lot less likely to go out on a limb and try something new. Now, what this means for Paul Heyman's future on TV is another question, because right now he has one client, and that client is Brock Lesnar, who we have not seen on television since he lost to Drew McIntyre at WrestleMania. We may not be seeing much of Paul Heyman at all, if that's the case, because all these years of wondering, will there be another Heyman guy? Are we going to get a Heyman girl? At one point, I thought it might be Ronda Rousey, because the two of them were close. Are we going to get a Heyman guy or a Heyman girl? We had Cesaro after WrestleMania 30, and we had Curtis Axel. Neither one worked out very well. I mean, Curtis Axel did win the Intercontinental title. But after that, what else did he do? What else did Curtis Axel do? The answer is nothing. He did nothing. The Cesaro-Heyman pairing was such a waste. They never even gave it a real chance. You could have paid that thing off down the road with a Cesaro-Brock Lesnar match, and they couldn't even do that. They couldn't even get that right. Now we have MVP on Raw. He's recruiting Lashley. He was hanging out with Shane Thorne and Brendan Vink from NXT a few weeks ago, which looks to be dead now. We haven't seen them on TV in a few weeks. If they want a manager type, they've already got one. They've got MVP. MVP is fine in that role. I don't need to see MVP in the ring. He can do fine in that role as an agent. Just like Paul Heyman, right? He was an agent. They could always find that one guy if they want to for Heyman to take under his wing. But that idea, this idea now that Paul Heyman, we might get a new dangerous alliance or something like that. I don't see it. If it was going to happen, it would have happened by now. I don't even know that Heyman is interested in that. I don't see that happening. Paul Heyman lasted a lot longer than Eric Bischoff did. Because Paul Heyman, at least, he had product knowledge, he knew the faces, he knew the names, he was up on all the storylines, and he had ideas of his own. For all of his ideas, however long-term they may have been, if you think that Monday Night Raw is a terrible show, he bears some of the responsibility for that. But at the end of the day, it's still a one-man show, and when they fired Eric Bischoff, I said it then and I'll say it again. Now they've gone and fired Paul Heyman. You can't fire your way out of this problem. When all these people are fired or relieved from their positions, after a while, you kind of ask yourself, are they the problem? Or is there some other problem here? You can't just fire your way out of this and expect that your fortunes are just going to miraculously change. I'm sure some of the numbers will improve when people start coming back to the buildings and they can start getting back to normal. I don't know how long that's going to take. Then you'll see all the people will pipe up and say, oh, you see, it was all COVID, because of course numbers are going to go back up. But the question is, how high are they going to go? Are you going to get back all of those fans who have abandoned Monday Night Raw? 1.7 is a new low point. Are you going to get all those people back, or are you losing some of these people forever? Like you did when WCW died and people were like, you know what? I don't need wrestling. When enough months go by and people find that, life goes on without pro wrestling, they might be a lot less likely to come back. Change can only come from the top. I'll keep saying it every year until it finally happens. Real change starts at the top. It's top down, not bottom up. Vince McMahon's biggest fan is Vince McMahon. His second biggest fan is Bruce Prichard. Bruce Prichard has made a very lucrative living for himself doing exactly what he thinks that Vince McMahon wants him to do because Vince McMahon is his boss. And what Vince wants, Vince gets. Bruce Prichard is not going to change anything.